ask Esmeralda whether or not a legal notice was posted. She's online.
I saw one.
I believe it was. And we are not going to have a roll call, because we have an electronic roll call. I believe, has everyone logged in into this meeting? Either out in the lobby or those folks online. And so we will go ahead and jump right in. My name is Michael Scarpello. I'm the Dallas County Elections Administrator. We've got several of our staff members here today that I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and what their role is within our organization. And we'll go ahead and move into our agenda. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. Sorry. Evan, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Burns. I'm a GIS analyst here at Dallas County Elections.
I'm Melissa Cuba. I'm the Deputy Election Administrator here.
Hi, my name is Kyle Rush, and I'm the Voting Sites Manager.
Is any other staff members in the room? So we will go ahead and jump right in, guys. So the screen shared here. Yes. Great. So today on our agenda, we're going to do a quick recap of our previous meeting when we met last Tuesday night. Discussion and vote on whether or not to go to retain a single model vote center plan or go to a dual model vote center plan. Discussion on future vote center evaluation criteria, presentation of data requested by VCAC members, and then discussion on next steps. So, to quickly recap what we talked about last week, we talked about the VCAC membership, and that's been in a state of flux a little bit. We had, I believe it was 49 members back in 2019. We talked to Commissioner's Court to find out whether or not they would like to have additional members. And we did get to add some additional members this year. And I believe our membership now is up to 63. And I believe there is a handout of that membership. I think that we need a little bit of an update on that.
It's the VCAC. Does not say VCAC, it's the VCAC.
That's a great point. I think, and so I believe that they need to do some, Esmeralda needs to update this also, because I'm looking at it and I'm just seeing this now. Where it says community organization, we need to know which community organization. So I would like one of my staff members to put that proper field and reprint these and hand them out by the end of the meeting. So everyone's aware of not only who the people are, but what organization they're representing. So Laura Varela, please, can you work on that? And then of course, Bobby, I think that we copied and pasted from our last meeting, we had a standing meeting on Wednesday. So background on votes. Last week we talked about background on vote centers. We talked about the statutory authority granting us the ability to have a vote center advisory committee. We talked about the history of 2019, and then we talked about the 2019 recommendations. And then we looked at the analysis of Dallas's vote center plan back in 2019, what happened after 2019, with the VCAC's activities in 2019.
I can hear you on that virtual. You're saying they're having trouble hearing.
Chance? I think that for those who didn't hear, the comment was that some people can't hear me virtually. So Chance is going to look into it. I think the good news is my microphone's working here really well, right? Unlike last week. I'll try to speak up a little bit louder. So we also talked about the usage of vote centers, and then our vote center plan concerns, our current plan, what the concerns were with it. And then we also talked about the discussion of future vote centers. We talked about the single model versus the dual model, and we talked about the timeline. And finally, we talked about the future VCAC meetings. So speaking of timeline, just this is a reminder from last week that March 3rd is our deadline to implement a plan for the May 6th joint election, our self-imposed deadline, legal deadline. And it's really important if it's the deadline for the if we have a single model vote center plan, that's a very tight timeline. And what that means is there's a lot of work to do to reevaluate all 400 or 500 locations. If we go with a low turnout, the dual model plan, that we can do that in phases. So that means is, phase one would be making the evaluation for the low turnout model, and then a longer timeline, maybe next August, next summer, for the second phase of that, where we'd be looking at the presidential election race in 2024. And so that's kind of a summation of those timelines. And one of the advantages that we talked about with that longer timeline is that we're bringing in SMU to help us with some of our analytics of these locations. So today we're talking, the major point of what we're doing today is a discussion about a single model versus a dual model approach. And so I've got a slide here on definitions and our options. So for a single model, the idea is to utilize the same number of vote centers for all elections. So as far as our options under a single model, we can keep the current number of vote centers. We can increase the number of vote centers, or of course we can reduce the number of vote centers. But I think under any of those options, we would be looking at not only the number, but the quality and which vote centers we're going to use. And so it's not only a quantitative study, it's a qualitative study. Under a dual model vote center plan, what that means is you'd have two models. You have a model that's used in what's projected to be a low turnout election. Typically, that would be a May joint election, where you would potentially reduce the number of vote centers from the current number of 469. And then you can have a high turnout model, which would be used for primary and general elections, where you would keep the number of vote centers near the current levels, reevaluate in those questionable vote centers that we kind of talked about last week, where there's ADA compliance, things like that. And we can recruit new higher quality vote centers going forward. So we mentioned this last week, the advantages of a single model plan. In the perfect world, you have lots and lots of vote centers and make it as convenient for voters as possible, right? And so the advantages of an existing single model, voters have accepted the vote center model in Dallas County. We virtually get no complaints about someone saying, why are you using vote centers instead of precinct polling places? So I think there's been acceptance there. With a single model, there's more options and low travel time for voters. And with this single model, we've done as much as we can to develop a reliable methodology for distributing our resources, allocating our resources and equipment. But there are concerns that we talked about last week about this single model. Some voters still don't understand their ability to vote anywhere. We still find that. And so that's, we talked about this last week. We think we've addressed this, and we're going to continue to address it, where the county spent $605,000 prior to the last November election, where we were doing our advertising campaign through social media, through broadcast TV, streaming TV, et cetera. So we will continue that educational effort to tell people you can vote anywhere. Vote where you want, when you want. And the second concern was difficulty in staffing a one-size-fits-all single model elections, and the cost of conducting one-size-fits-all single model elections. Then the last concern was vote centers are not available. Some vote centers are not available suitable or ADA compliant. So I mentioned, concern number one, I got a little check mark there next to it that we believe that one's, taken care of, and we're going to continue to work on that. I don't think that needs to be a discussion point at this point, at least as far as this body is concerned at this point. So what we move on to concern number two, difficulty in staffing single model elections. So the thing to remember, the point of this slide is that turnout for May and November elections are quite different. As we can see, the 2019 May joint election, on election day, we had 54,847 voters, as opposed to the 2020 presidential, that we had 118,000 voters, which was for a presidential quite low. Because what we know that we were in the middle of COVID, more people voted by mail, more people voted early, because there was that 3-week early voting period. And then for 2021 joint, it was at 57,000, which was near that 54,000. And then this year, we jumped back up to normal, 213,000 people on election day. So what that really boils down to in summary terms is for May elections, you're usually around 9%, 9.5%, 10%. And for off-year elections, general elections, it's usually around this 30 to 40%. This year being 44. I think in 2018 it was 54, but 2014 I think it was 34. And then in the presidential it was 66. So November elections considerably bigger than May elections. So difficulty in staffing. So this gives you some idea of how many workers that we needed in these elections. So in November 2020, we needed 5,200 workers. We had 5,000, so we were 238 short. In November 2021, we needed 1,800. So that's an off year. That's an odd number November election. And we had 1719 and we were 122 short. In May 2022, we needed 1,845 and we had 1,525. So we're 325 short. And in November 2022, we needed 3,161 and we had 3,486. So what this really tells you is that the same interest there is in voting in an election equates to the same interest in working in an election. In other words, we never really have trouble finding people to work in a presidential. Everyone wants to vote in a presidential, they want to work in a presidential. They're very excited about it. Similarly, in a gubernatorial, it's this year, the party did a fantastic job of recruiting, and we would have surplus of workers. As opposed to a May election, we don't have May 21 on here, which would be helpful. But I know we had a shortage in that election too, because May elections are typically on Saturday, as opposed to a November election where it's on a Tuesday. It's a Saturday in May, and it's competing. Those elections are competing with graduations, vacations, kids, being out of school, etc. So it's a much tougher election to staff. So this is kind of summing this up. Here's a specific example. Referring to a poll worker, showing how difficult it is. So going into the May 7th, 2022 election, we knew we were going to be short just because of the feedback that we were getting. And so we went to this body, and as well as Commissioner's Court, and we reduced the number of polling places from our normal 469. I think we officially took an action on deleting 40, but it ended up being a deletion of 63 because of other locations that didn't want to participate. Good question.
Yes, is it possible to go back to that graphic one? You were saying that it's easier in a presidential election, but I might be confused, but I think the presidential was a 20, November 20.
Yeah.
So we were short 238.
Keep in mind,
Midterm is November 22.
keep in mind COVID. We were in the heat of COVID. And so I think that scared an awful lot of people away. Typically, presidential is pretty easy to do. Oh, yeah.
I was thinking earlier, you said something about high school students, so we had a lot turnout to the school district vote. I was thinking that might be a good thing.
Yeah, high school students in a November election are, they're abundant. We had over 500 this last November, 2022. And so we had more than one high school student at every location. Or well, every location had at least one coming. So getting back to this example from May of last year. So even though prior to the election, we closed 63, we still had to close 7 on election day, on top of the 63. And that's because, you know, election judges, well, some more stats, election judges who all week said, I will be there, I will be there, I will be there. 2 days before the election, when it came time to pick up their equipment, we had 81 no-shows, 81. And then, so we scrambled, that's on Sunday, or I'm sorry, yeah, on Sunday, no, I'm sorry, Thursday, when they picked those things up. And so Friday we scrambled, Saturday we scrambled, and we filled most of those holes except for 7. But in addition to that, other poll worker shortages, clerks, et cetera, there was a total of 320 shortages for that day. So the third concern is the cost of conducting single model elections. And, you know, we have a lot of participating jurisdictions. And these May elections, we have to remember that the costs are not paid for by the county. The costs are paid for by the participating jurisdictions. So the cities, the school districts, they're carrying all the freight. For the November election, the county pays. And if someone happens to join in as a joint election, the county still pays the majority, and then that participating jurisdiction pays a small fraction. But for the May elections, they pay a lot of money. And so in 2021, their costs went up significantly. And that's because we did a lot of things. We had bought new equipment in 2019, but in 2020, we never charged for it. The county kind of gave the jurisdictions a freebie. But in 2021, when I came, that was one of the part of our, you know, doing our job is to make sure that we're properly recouping, you know, the county's expenditures. So we had to, there was a new price list to start charging for our new equipment. There was a pay increase for poll workers. They were making $11 an hour. They went up to $16 an hour for clerks and $18 an hour for judges. And one of the big ones was that we had 432 vote centers in 2021, as opposed to 324 precinct polling places in 2019. And that's a result of kind of a quirk in the law at the time. The interpretation was that if you have, you must use all of your countywide polling places because VCAC recommended them and vote center, the Commissioners Court adopted them. And so the Commissioners Court said 469, so we had to do our best to get to 469. We ended up with 432. And so that's a huge increase.
He's got stuff.
My computer went, so I gotta look up here. I'll look at that. And so in addition to that, there was a new vote center, there was a new formula to distribute costs. So what that means is it used to be that a jurisdiction paid for the votes, the precinct polling places within its jurisdiction. And what happened when we went to vote centers, keep in mind that everybody can vote anywhere. So a jurisdiction doesn't really have particular locations. It's paying for, everybody's paying for everybody. So there's a different formula how you distribute. And so that new formula redistributed those costs. And some locations, you know, had to pay more, some pay a little bit less, but it kind of redistributed how those things work. So I think we lost our feed.
Michael,
Yes,
you guys have an average cost for those vote centers? Just across the
we
board?
do. It's around, and I think we have a slide on this later on, but I think it's around $6,000. Average. Of course, some are more than others, right? So, you can see it again, right? So that new vote center formula kind of changed the cost. So a lot of jurisdictions weren't real happy with me because they're like, why did my costs go up? And, you know, we explained, well, all these reasons, but they were like, please, can you do something about this? This is crazy. We can't afford this. And so what we did in 2021 is we tightened our belt really tight. And we did everything we could to cut our costs. And so our projected costs were $4.6 million to conduct that 2021 election using the old model, the way we ran elections. We actually cut those costs to about 2.9 million. So, you know, and we did that by, you know, reducing our reliance on vendors. We reduced our number of temporary workers that work within this buildings. And we really did a pretty thorough job of beginning our analytics. That was very first stage of using analytics to distribute equipment and supplies to locations. Instead of just using averages and kind of sending the same amount everywhere, we started to use science to using historic voter turnout, et cetera, to distribute things. And so that helped us in 2021 reduce our costs. Hands, please. I apologize, everyone. So when I talk about analytics, what does that mean? So, and I talk about this because one of the reasons when I talk about cost cutting, I want people to understand that when they say, someone may say, don't cut the number of polling places, be more efficient. Just be more efficient. Well, we've done that. That's what I'm trying to get to is, what we do is, first thing we do is we project overall turnout. We look at historic patterns, how many people voted in this county for this type of election. We project turnout by type. How many people do we predict are going to vote by mail? How many do we predict are going to vote by early voting? How many are going to vote on election day? So that's countywide. So then we take that and we then, using historic patterns, we predict how many people are going to vote at every location. And not only that, then we actually predict how many people are going to vote using historic patterns by the hour. How many are going to vote at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And then we calculate the capacity of the equipment. So we take that's one piece. How many are going to vote? Now, how many can we handle? How long does it take to check in a voter? What's our capacity for each machine? Each poll book. What's our capacity for someone to cast a vote? Small election is pretty fast. Yeah, it's a 1 subject, 2 subject. A presidential, it's a 10-minute deal. So we time that. What's our throughput for e-poll books? What's our throughput for the voting machines? The throughput on the ballot tabulator is pretty fast. It's, you know, it's a 1 second deal, so that's not a big deal. But then, how many people do we need to man those machines? You know, a small location, you got 2 clerks, a judge, and maybe, and then a third clerk, for, typically it's 4 people minimum. But for larger locations, we have certain formulas that kind of talk about how many are we going to need for crowd control? How many are we going to need? What's the parking throughput? We put all that into one big formula, and we calculate what our capacity is for that location, and we match that up against what the expected turnout is, and then we try to make sure that we allocated the correct amount and not too much and not a shortage. So that's why we use those more accurate projections rather than just going on averages throughout the county. And then we pad up because you just don't want to be short of people. You don't want to be short of supplies, et cetera. We add some padding. And then most importantly, we monitor. So we monitor by the hour. We were looking through our e-poll books. We know how many people are voting, and we have these really sophisticated spreadsheets that show us, we might have under projected somewhere. The trends are high, or the trends are low. If the trends are low, we don't really care. Well, we've got too many people there. We don't pull people and say go home for the day. But if we're short, we might shift some people around. We might send some more people out. And so that monitoring is really critical. I should mention that prior to all of that, we do review, our projections with stakeholders. We talk to city clerks. We talk to parties. Because city clerks know their cities hate getting hot races. Parties know the party races, et cetera. So it's kind of we're trying to make it more of a science. And the thing about vote centers is we don't have a huge track record. We've only got so many elections. Every election that we conduct, we will know more and more. Our projections will get better and better because we've got more of a track record. I think right now I wanted to kind of pause, and I wanted to let Melissa, you're going to show us a little that spreadsheet, just to give you an example of what that spreadsheet looks like. She'll go ahead and share.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to run through really quickly kind of what we talked about our projection turnout for this last November 2022 election to give you a real life sample of one of the locations that we work with. So I'm trying to look at the screen as well, make sure I zoom in enough for everybody. So this is kind of where we start at the high level turnout projections. So we have our mail ballot, early voting, election day, and we gather up the historical information for similar type elections. So in this particular, for the 2022 November, we gathered up the general elections from the previous even years. And so we have 2014, 2018. We threw 2020 knowing it was going to be much higher than 2022, but to kind of gauge the reality of what we came up with. And then we looked also at the 2022 primary to see if there was something different about the primary from the previous primaries that may feed into the general. So these were our projections for this election here in these two columns. Basically, we estimated a 56.5% overall turnout. And as you can see, we estimated high because our actual is over in the yellow was 44%. Our mail ballot projected turnout was 6%, which was in line. We had 5.8%, 4.6%, but our turnout in mail ballot was 3.7%. Our early voting turnout, we estimated at about 68% of the people showing up early, and of our actual turnout, 62.3% showed up in early voting. And our election day turnout, even though the percentages look like they're a bit different, 26 to 34, the numbers are only a couple thousand off, 206,000 to 213,000. So like Mike said, we always, number one, our projections are not estimates of exactly what we expect because we want to plan high. So we don't ever want to sell ourselves short in this phase. We want to bump it up to a reasonable amount so that we're planning for a higher number than actual. So we're not mad when our projections are too high. And then,
And I would just say that part of the, I don't know about how you guys all felt going into this budget, but when we talked to the parties and lots of other people, the question was, does this feel like 2018 or does this feel like 2014? As far as how hot the races were, and almost everyone said it felt like 2018, that it was, 2018 was 54%. So in fact, people said, no, it's gonna be hotter. And so that's why we're at 56%.
Yeah.
Now, it ended up not being as hot as we thought, but that's okay. We'd rather be too high than too low.
and so then we take this overall number and we apply it at the location level. And so for election day, I've just isolated a single location to kind of walk through the different columns. So we have the actual turnout from a few elections, and like Mike said, vote centers are fairly new. So unfortunately, going back to 2014 and 2018 is difficult because it was different requirements, right? You had to vote at a certain location. So we stick with our more current turnout, but we did use that also as a point of reference for November 18.
That's my voting location, and it got hit by a tornado in 2019, which is why it's not on in 2020. And the turnout probably fell on that one. It's probably an odd one to pick because it had been closed. And then when we did November, one of them, it was just fresh opened. I don't remember which one it was. It was probably the primary in 2022. And it was a crazy space because they were just getting the floor down and we weren't allowed to do anything. And she made people do crazy door in and out. Anyway, so I hate to tell you, but that's not your normal situation.
Well, I will say it performed as we expected it to, at least.
You really, the 370?
Well, this is March 2022, so I'm looking at the November 22 projection. So
Okay, so you're not okay, because going from 18, it dropped because it had been.
yeah, and so we
Okay.
compared, these are actual
Okay.
turnouts that people showed up, and so we looked at the percent of the overall turnout. So in November 2018, 0.29% of everybody who voted at any location voted at this location. And then 0.33% in March 22 and 0.30% in March 24. So we distributed that and estimated a 0.34% showing up at this location in 2022 November, which would have been 690. And I'm sorry, 703 after we pushed it up a little bit because of the turnout. So 703 was what we based our projection on. Our actual was 681. So that location wasn't bad. Now, we have other examples where we were off, but we'll talk about that in a second. So then, as Mike said, we look at our hourly turnout. And so this is our, what we call peak hourly. So we go through every hour, we collect data of how many voters vote at every location. And then we collect what was their busiest hour, because ultimately that's the hour that's going to get you, right? Hour where you may have lines. And so we look at locations and we may add staff or add equipment or just have people on standby for locations that have kind of abnormally high peak hourly turnout. So all of this in consideration, we then use calculations based off of our equipment usage to come up with how many pieces of equipment and then how many workers we need. So here we talk about each piece of equipment and we go through various things. So we assume what we feel is rather graciously 2.5 minutes per voter at the check-in table. So the check-in table is supposed to be kind of fast-paced moving environment. So 2.5 minutes at the check-in table for each poll booth. At the voting machine, this varies every election. It's based on what is on the ballot, how long the ballot is, how much reading there is to do, how many decisions to make. So we had 10 minutes per voter scheduled for this election. And then the vote tabulator, like Mike said, is pretty consistent. So those numbers are then applied to how many people are expected to turn out that location. And it tells us how many pieces of equipment we need for each equipment, which also helps inform how many workers we need for each location. So that's a general overview. And then these numbers vary. I think our lowest projection was 23 and our highest was in the 1900s. And so it really is a wide range of turnout at each individual location. It's not This was kind of in that middle ground, but it's really different. So if we planned for 1,900 people at every location, we would be incredibly overstaffed. If we planned for the lowest, we would be incredibly understaffed.
So we wanted to just give you a little bit of a flavor. If you really want to make your head hurt, you open up all 469 locations and take a look at all that and making the adjustments for those various locations. But bottom line is, we tried to do the math, we tried to do the science, and to a certain extent, it's working pretty well. So getting back to the presentation, back on the screen. So that's the analytics piece. So we talked about how election costs are increasing. So we look at the unit cost of any particular location, which could vary because the unit cost is dependent upon how many people, how much equipment, because for every location, we have to charge for the equipment. So, and I can't remember, something like, if a voting machine costs $3,000 for the county to buy, for every election, we can amortize it, we can charge up to 10% for that election. So if there's 3 machines, and that's $300 each, it's $900 rent for those jurisdictions. And so we have some poll workers saying, I want more equipment. And we say, I don't know that Sinead would want you to have more equipment because every more piece of equipment costs. And so that's one of the things you might hear, right? And give us more equipment. And it's sometimes poll workers have PSD, right? They're like, they remember the presidential. We say, yeah, we understand you were really busy in the presidential. You're not going to be busy for this. So we try to hone those numbers down so that we're not overcharging these jurisdictions. So here's some costs. I think we had this slide in the last meeting. So for the May 19 election, there was 352 units. The unit is, don't get too hung up on that number. There's 324 locations because the way that model worked, there's a unit cost. But anyway, it was $2 million, $5,700 per location. November 2020, you can't really count that one. You got to throw that out because there was a lot of grant money, CARES money paid for a lot. So don't even look at that line because it's irrelevant. May 2021, we kind of tightened our belts, and that's where our unit cost went from $5,700 down to $4,800. And in May of 22, we tightened our belts even more. We were down to $3,400 per unit cost. November 2022, it's a bigger election. There's much more turnout. There's much more equipment and people. That unit cost went up to $6,800. Going into May 23, even though we will have our belts pretty tight, the costs are going up. And I think there's the next slide on that. They continue to go up, and just like everything else, eggs are up more expensive, so are everything else. And so when you look at, from a cost perspective, just using some made up numbers, 469 locations for election day could cost $2.8 million. If you cut to a low turnout model, even though the unit cost is going to stay high, the cost to the jurisdictions is about half, so about 1.4 million. So it's how many places do you have? Okay, so this is a look at how many locations, right? And so and how many locations and how some of these locations are underutilized in a May election. So if you look at May 2019 on the left-hand side, 53,000 voters. There was only 354 locations because back then we were in a precinct model. We did scale down. And there was 43 locations that had under 50 voters, and there was 10 locations that had under 25 voters. You go to the presidential, or the March 20, the presidential primary, 188,000 voters, 452 vote centers. Only one location had under 50 voters. Skip to the May election, May 21, 57,000 total voters, 433 vote centers, a jump from 324 up to 433. We had 156 locations with under 50 voters. We had 74 locations with under 25 voters, and so on, as you can read across. As you can see, the May elections and then an off-year November election, there's just a lot of underutilized vote centers. This just gives you an idea for the May 2022 election. You know, we say under 25. Well, we had one location, Cardwell Career Preparatory Center, one voter all day. MLK, 3 voters all day. Wilmer Hutchins, 3 voters all day. Good Street Baptist Church, 5 voters all day. Shanae, $5,000, $5,000, $5,000 for each of those locations. One voter, 5,000, 3 voters, 5,000, et cetera. So this just gives you an idea how low some of these numbers are in the May election.
I would still want to call that. I mean, maybe we would have a
Good question.
And also you had redistricting in May, which in Dallas, you did not have any city council elections in May, which probably negated a lot of potential participation because people would have shown up to vote for their city council candidates or whatever. That election didn't happen.
Somewhat true, but if you go back to chance, please. So, to your point though, May of 2021, the numbers are very similar, in fact, worse. 74 locations with under 25 voters. 156 with under 50. I don't know if that theory holds water. But I'm sorry, to your point, it is a little bit less than May of 2022. May of 22, there was more, 121 under 25.
You were going to have a number of city council people running in May anyway, just because of the rotation of city council in Dallas. So there would have been some impact. We just won't know how many of those sites would have been impacted by that turnout. Right? We can agree that
There's a lots of factors, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what do other counties do? Of course, we always want to know what our other counties do, because we don't want to be out of the norm. So we're still finding some of these numbers, verifying some of these numbers. Harris, I don't think we've got good numbers yet. So pause on Harris. So there's our numbers. In May of 21, we had 432 locations. In November of 22, May, November, we had 462, roughly the same, because that's our models to keep them roughly the same. Tarrant County, 176 locations, and then they go up to 316 in November, 176 to 316. Bear, 243 up to 342. Travis, 98 up to 167. El Paso, 67 up to 153. And Collin, 57 up to 105. So all of them use some form of a 2-tier model. So that's kind of where it brings us to this discussion of where do we want to be? I'm going to throw this computer just into something about.
I have a,
the
this is
right?
Molly from Disability Rights Texas. I had a question. Real quick, I tried to raise my hand virtually, but
Okay.
whatever. Are there any polling sites that you do not charge?
There's polling sites that don't charge us. So
Okay.
school doesn't charge us rent, but we still have to pay for the personnel. We still have to pay for the equipment. or the jurisdictions have to pay for the personnel needs, but
Is the library charge?
I
Yeah.
don't, I don't think so.
Ours don't. We have 3.
Most government buildings don't, or the churches, private businesses. So where we're at now is on our agenda was, what is the attitude of the body? Do we want to move forward to investigate the implementation of a dual model approach? Or do we want to investigate just keeping a single model approach and investigating, finding that sweet number where it's, less than 469, but enough to, not so many that it's completely wasteful for a May election, but it's enough for a presidential election, as opposed to, let's just create 2 models and not try to split the baby.
What's your recommendation?
I don't know that I have a recommendation, because that's the purpose of this body. I'm here to present the facts. I'm here to, tell you the pluses and minuses, et cetera. And I think it's the will of the people, what they'd like to see.
Staff, your staff, to go one or the other.
I think that running 250 polling places is easier than running 450 polling places.
So that's the dual model.
Yes.
That's what I favor more the dual. It's fiscally responsible for our cities. We're always having to watch our dollars and cents.
So I think what I would like to do, I want to go ahead and we'll go around the room, hear comments, and then we'll entertain, after everyone kind of hears some comments, then we'll entertain a motion. Okay? So we'll just kind of head this way. If there's any other comments, in fact, if you'd like, let's go ahead and pass this microphone around so everyone can hear. I think you got to talk rather close to that one.
Hello, Alicia, Thomas City, DeSoto. I'm in favor, off top, when I first heard you mention it, and for the exact same reason, being fiscally responsible, is very important there. So I'm in favor of the dual model. I would like to look at the number of voters at each of my 8 vote centers. I know of 2 in particular that are kind of low. But I do also want to look at who those voters are. To your point, I'm not sure what her name is, but to that point, because there may be senior citizens who aren't able to go too far or anything like that, though. But I'm definitely in favor of the dual model.
So let me just say this. So when we head in one of these 2 paths, then we get to the tough work, right? And that's evaluating which ones do we want to keep, which ones do we want to change, which ones do we want to increase, what areas do we want to increase. So then that work begins.
Absolutely.
We're just kind of looking for the general direction right now.
Absolutely. You said.
Oh,
I know.
You go this way, everyone.
Do you want to say? No? I'm Shanae Jennings from the city of Irving. I've talked to my mayor and some of my council people about this. We would be in favor of the dual model. However, we do want to make sure that the county commissioners court gives and takes. Like, it can't all be their voting locations if we go to the dual model. Like, we wouldn't want to insert one of our regular polling locations and then to exit one of theirs for, the future to come, because it can't be all one-sided. But we're definitely in favor of the dual voting model. If we can, and it's going to be the early voting locations actually that we're going to put our foot down on, because they become vote centers. So, and we know our data, and we know our turnouts within our city, both in the early voting and election day, November and May models. So we've got a pretty good grasp. We just want to show that we're working in good faith and that the county commissioners court's going to work in good faith back.
I will.
Sorry, Michael. Excuse me, Mike, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm trying to understand her comment about wanting the commissioners court to work with them? Can she explain? I'm not understanding that.
Yeah, the commissioners court at the end of the day, they have the decision as to what vote centers they allow. And the commissioners court set their vote centers. Like, I'll give you an example. This is a solid example. For years and years and years, the Irving City Hall and Valley Ranch Library have been the commissioners court's vote centers. And Elba Garcia is our commissioner. Now she has brought in Bear Creek and Oak Haven, I think it's Methodist Church, and one of our colleges. Well, we want in exchange for them to insert Irving Arts Center. And we would be willing to give it MacArthur High Schools. So does that make sense?
I think that I hear what you're saying, and I understand the concern, but I think it's the perception that that they belong to the courts, and I think that the court, those voting centers are really governed by those individuals, and they have the right to say that they don't want to host those voting on those dates. And some of
What
the schools
individuals? I'm sorry. I'm not understanding that comment. What
That's
individuals?
okay. That's okay. I understand your comment, and I just wanted the clarification. Thank you.
Well, the commissioners court makes the decision at the end of the day. It's their
Right.
decision.
Right.
And not the council's decision, the commissioners court decision. So we want to make sure that the commissioners court is going to work with the city councils. That's what I'm saying.
And just to remind everyone, because I think I emphasized this last week, but not so much this week. This body will eventually make, after you kind of head down one path or the other, and then you'll make a recommendation. It's simply a recommendation to commissioners court, and they will act on that recommendation, or they'll reject it or modify it. So ultimately, yes, it is their decision.
Right. And Michael, I remember last year, May of last year, when we went through the list, if there was a center that the local municipalities did not want to open, we agreed to close though. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Okay.
Last year, when there was a modification, it was.
Okay. So all the school districts, the cities, they have the right to say that these are the locations that they want to keep open, and these are those that they are recommending in closing. Am I correct?
They have to say something.
Right.
They have a say so.
Yeah.
And as we went through all 400, anytime there was a discrepancy, we agreed to either close or leave those open based upon their recommendations.
As we reevaluate, we will.
I guess I don't understand.
Keep on, can you say as we reevaluate? As we reevaluate, I think that will not be as available as it is now, because we've cut these 400 and however many centers, 63 or whatever, to by necessity. We had to cut because we weren't going to get workers. Now that if we go to a dual model, we won't be cutting. That will be the model. If we stay at a single model, I don't know, he's going to have to tell us what happens. That's not my wheelhouse.
But as you're just saying, we want an open communication.
Yeah, I'm just saying,
That's
we
all.
want to give and take. Irma.
Hebron, go ahead. Or, I'm sorry.
Irma Parker, I didn't realize I was supposed to speak again, but I'm in favor of the dual. And I've as well spoken to my council, and we had two locations in our city, and we're only 4.4 square miles. We decided that we want to just go with one facility in our town that's vote center, and is early voting and election day. Save money for everybody around.
One thing I will mention, and if you go ahead, that's fine. Right now, we're going to focus on election day. Early voting, my sense is, we'll get to early voting locations. My sense is we'll probably keep the same early voting locations for all elections. 47, 50, whatever it might be, for every election, to have that that tendency on those locations. And we're strictly talking the big money, the big
Yep.
dollars for these large numbers.
I want to jump in for 1 second. There's some discussion online about May elections and that the cities pick their locations for May elections versus the county. And there's a change in that from the countywide polling places. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit. There's some confusion. Previously, in the precinct elections, the cities could pick polling places for the May elections. That's why there was the ability to shrink and grow. The countywide polling place changes that, and there's some confusion about that.
So the way the law works, it says when you, in a countywide polling place model, a vote center model, that when a county adopts it for all elections, whether it's for joint elections, November elections, et cetera, you shall use the countywide polling places. So it's kind of gaveled down, you shall use these, and cities don't have the ability to say, I want this one, not this one. It's all or nothing, basically. But what you can do is create a two-tier model. You can't, kind of pick and choose and close and at your own whim.
Hebron Alexander, Allison AACP. Administratively, I understand the dual model discussion. I understand that there's an efficiency, especially for municipalities and school districts, as they are largely the entities that are funding the bill for the elections in May. My concern is with the citizenry in Dallas County. And in that we continue to have a communication network breakdown that doesn't quite make it to Joe Citizen in the way we'd all like for it to. We still have a large number of citizens that are still not certain of what is the case when it comes to voting until November. And so we all agree that there are some cuts that are probably going to be beneficial. But if we go to a dual model, I think we run the risk of adding confusion at a time where we need to be providing more clarity in promoting a bigger understanding. If you cut the voting centers down by 25% across the board, and everybody knows every election we go here, that's clarity and certainty. But when you then turn around and say, well, in May you do this, but in November we do this, we already have people who aren't paying enough attention. And so I'm concerned that this would be injecting a certain amount of chaos with that. And so if we're not collectively promoting better communication about elections all the way across the board, every single person in here is more weedsy than the average person. And we have a certain lack of understanding about what's what. So if we are connected and lack that understanding, it's going to be more chaotic for the average person. That's the foundation of my concern. And then we get to the weeds of where the location's going to be. Which ones are they? How much is this going to change the voting patterns in neighborhood, this neighborhood or with this particular community? And those weeds, we can't ignore. So until we have, from my perspective, until we have more information about how this is going to be impacted, do we have scores for voting centers pre-vote center versus now that we've implemented vote centers, so that we can all kind of see in real time, what has this done? What has this meant? Where can we find alternatives that will be equally compromising or equally advantageous to the community? I think we're a little cart before the horse, and that's my comment.
Hebron, I do want to remind you that before we had the vote center system, it was just like that. We had May election vote polling places, and then November's were separate. So remember, that's not uncommon. I don't disagree with you though.
We
Yeah,
all need to
I
do a
don't
little bit
disagree
more for
with you.
communication. I agree with you there.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Anybody else on this side? this gentleman.
Don Waits, Precinct Chair. The dual would be satisfactory, I think, to me, but the one thing that concerns me more than anything else, that we don't have voting centers that within 50 yards of each other, and you know what I'm talking about. We still had that in November. I still don't understand I thought we did away with that one. But the dual system seems to be the logical way to do this. Because May elections, I've been doing this since '88. And yes, May elections are just not hot enough. I think it's a turn. So that's just my 2 cents. Thanks.
Right, you're right.
Gary Yarborough. I brought this up before, but apparently there's been some confusion. It says that you've had no complaints whatsoever about going to vote centers, or very few. I've had
complaints about the model. I can't remember a single person saying, why aren't we voting at precincts? I think people like the concept of votes.
I've had many complaints about vote centers. And one of the things you mentioned in the last meeting was if we have the vote centers, we have to have the electronic poll books. And I've had a huge number of complaints about the electronic poll books because that's a massive way for people to cheat. And cheating is going on, not just in Dallas County, but in every single county in the country where the poll books are being,
It's not.
are having a huge number of people, registered voters going up in the poll books and then going down after the election. And some of that might be accounted for. There are more people registering to vote before the election because they want to vote in that election 30 days before. And a lot of people are being purged out after the election because of federal law says you have to purge them out after a couple of cycles. They don't vote, but that's not going to count for like 1/10 of 1% of it. There's a huge amount of cheating in there. People are hacking in and things like that. If we want to get rid of the electronic poll books, we have to get rid of the vote centers. I know a lot of people are opposed to that because of the cheating in that. That's one way we can do election integrity.
Appreciate your comment. Next.
Anybody?
It's ridiculous.
Alexis Denard, VCAC. I agree with Keelan's comments. I think from an efficiency perspective, dual does make sense. Everyone wants to be fiduciary responsible for their dollars. I think the biggest concern for me, just to piggyback on Keelan's comments, is around communications. You showed a slide that said, hey, we've got that completed. We've got a check mark on that. I would venture to say that we need to understand fully what that communication plan looks like. What's the distribution model of that plan? Understanding who it's impacting, when and where, because timing is everything. You slapping up something 2 weeks before an election is not the same thing as being thoughtful around how do we make sure that all of the municipalities understand and how are they communicating, and how do you hold accountable towards that, because that is going to be critical. Whatever model you choose is going to be critical in that aspect. And so I think that the thoughtfulness has to be around how you communicate this, because if once you open this, it's going to be very hard to close this back. And so we need to be very thoughtful in how we communicate this to our citizens.
And just to clarify, and I appreciate your comments. I think when I kind of put that check mark right there, I don't know that communication, I think we all know that we got to continue to educate, communicate, et cetera. I don't know that it's a factor big enough to make a difference on the decision that you come up with today.
I think it does. I think it has a huge impact. If I've been going to ABC Library for 25 years, and that's the library that I've been going to, and all of a sudden you tell me now I've got to go to CDE library that's over here, and I don't know that, and it's on May, and then it's really this, you cause confusion, you cause frustration, you cause what's happening, you cause all kinds of different things associated with that. So I don't agree with that. There's nothing wrong with over communicating to ensure that there's effectiveness and consistency. This is voting, and this is a right for people to be able to have, and to exercise it, you need to be educated to it. So
I think the great news is your commissioner's court has shown a tremendous generosity this last year, spending money that's never been spent before. Back in 2019, when this originally happened, there was no big expenditure to educate. This year alone, we spent $180,000 in April and $605,000 in October to educate people. And I would assume that educational effort is going to continue in many, many facets.
This is-
One other thing I want to point out too, something to consider. Is it better to educate people well in advance to say, we've got this many in this election and this many in this election, and kind of get used to that pattern? Or is it better to say, oh, we've got this many all the time, and then have to close some at the last minute? Because that's the road we're in right now, right? The road we've gone down because of the shortages of poll workers. Next.
This is Molly from Disability Rights Texas. I had a quick comment or question regarding the outreach. To address your question, I don't know if it's better to do it closer to the election or ongoing. I would say, as a trainer who does this across the state, it's important to do it ongoing throughout the year. And then as you get closer to the elections, you focus more of your attention on the election dates and where to find resources about what the candidates are, what the issues are, where your vote locations are going to be, making a plan to go vote, making a plan for transportation, things like that. You can hone in your outreach more specifically towards that election. Also, one of my follow-up questions was, what efforts is the elections department doing towards, I know that y'all did some foreign language implementation into the outreach for vote centers, but I specifically have questions about, what are you doing towards underserved communities like your deaf communities, your blind and visual impairment communities? How are they getting information about these vote centers? Are y'all doing something specific with them? Because it's a very close-knit communities these are, and they often feel like they don't have the information they need to go vote.
So I want us to keep them, but I'm going to go ahead and answer your question. So this last year, or the last year and a half, we recognized that the county does not put enough effort into communication. That's why we created a new position called a communications manager. We've created, I think, 3 new positions in our communications department. And we now have an aggressive, Nick is probably in here somewhere. Nick's in the back. Nick is our communications manager. He is now, not only him and his team, aggressively working, especially with online, social media, things like that, a fairly comprehensive plan that's continuing to evolve. So, and we worked with an outside vendor called ABI that helped us develop that plan to be very comprehensive, to hit people in many, many ways. So our efforts in communications about elections, educating people, will continue in the great foundation it already built this last year. Next.
So no, wait, but y'all didn't answer my question. What, maybe if your communication staff members are here, they can help answer this, but what efforts have been made historically to outreach to these communities, like the deaf community, the visually impaired community, the disability community? What efforts are being made or have been done towards that?
Molly, that's a great question. I just don't know it's the right venue at this point.
How is it not the right venue?
Because we're the issue at hand right now is, what path do we want to take as a body to head down? Because let's put it this way, either path you take, communication is critical, and that we've got to continue to do that. So it's really not it's just not on point at this point. And so.
Well, maybe I should clarify these questions.
No,
but maybe I should clarify these questions are connecting to the point of about my decision on how I want to vote for these dual models, because it'll also implement proper outreach can increase your voter turnout in certain areas that maybe they didn't exist before.
I think absolutely. If there's a radical change, that probably increases the need for even more aggressive outreach. But I think that there's a need for outreach in either case. And so that's why, in the interest of time, I don't want to make this a long debate. I really would like to hear everyone's opinion so we can move on about, but we would love to talk to you more about the details of our plan, and Nick can get together with you and fill you in on that.
Well, y'all have my contact information, so I look forward to that.
Great, we do too. Go ahead, Bob.
My name's Bonnie Matthias. I'm with the Delaware County Democratic Party. I am in favor of, we are in favor of the dual model approach. We worked very hard last year to whittle down, if you will, some of the locations that were basically across the street from each other. We cut out, I think, we ended up 40 less locations, I think, and it was, we had no problems. I think I had one phone call from a lady, and then she saw the sign on the door that said, these are the other places where you can go. Because we do provide information to people where if this place is closed, these are the other places, and there's only going to happen one. And they're all going to be on bus lines. I mean, it was a very comprehensive discussion with the parties and the elections department. Very distant everywhere. Because it's just, we have to do this right. We cannot staff 469 locations every single election. I'm just going to tell you, it's impossible. And we have tried very hard, the parties and the elections department. We've reached out to libertarians and independents and asked them to jump on board as well. It's just, we're not going to be able to do it. We need to make comprehensive decisions and include our municipalities and make sure that the people understand voting is your vote. So it's also your responsibility to figure out a plan.
Michael, this is Eric Cedillo, I'm the chair of the VCAC committee. And
Yeah.
I certainly am not sold on necessarily implementation of a dual model approach, but I'm assuming this motion is to begin the investigation, certainly hearing the back and forth that we're hearing with respect to the dual model. At this time, I'd move to investigate the implementation of the dual model approach. And I'm assuming that moves us into a position where we're having discussions, longer discussions about, the possibility of doing these things. If I could get some from you, an idea of what it is you're looking at in terms of what we would be looking at in an investigatory implementation of a dual model. Is this going to be additional meetings with additional information provided to us? Because everybody's expressing concerns on both sides, and I'm assuming this isn't a vote to adopt a dual model tonight. It would be a motion to investigate the possibility of implementation, which I think there's enough concern on both sides that I'd be happy to make that motion. But I would like to hear from you what the plan is with respect to additional meetings that we would have to have these discussions.
Sure, it's a great point, and I will just say that's something we kind of covered in our first meeting, and I probably should have reiterated it. We're in meeting number 2 in a series of meetings. Once we pick a path, one of these 2 paths, we will continue to meet and dive into more of the details of which path, the details of how we will implement that path.
Okay, well,
So,
as a member of VCAC, I would move to investigate the implementation of the dual model approach.
Hey, Eric, can I ask you, just as a courtesy to the other folks, can you hold off on that motion? Because one of the things I kind of said is we're going to go around the room, get some feedback, and then entertain a motion.
Well, with the second,
some other people that are anxious to speak.
with the second, we could have discussion. Michael is the way I would look at it.
Okay, it's been seconded. Let's go ahead and continue the discussion.
Correct.
So, okay.
Yes, my name is Tiffany and I'm the Vice President of the Vietnamese American Community Center. So I prefer the dual model, and I know that we have a lot of concern and all the concern is linked together. the cost, the people who work at every location. And one thing, like you said before, the education. Right now, because some area, they are multiple nationality. So how can you make people understand the importance of every candidate? What is the good, the bad, all the history, we only have it in American, like TV, and a lot of people, if they are in the community, they don't watch American news. And even the American news, they only more focused about November election. The May election rarely on the television. And each community right now, they have their own community. They don't use the American, the networking or something like that. So how can, in some area, they have so many nationalities, like Garland area. So you will need to find a plan for them to know ahead what is each candidate history and all the good characteristics of each person. And I think that will help people, because if they go out and vote, it doesn't matter who they vote for. Then why they have to go vote? So I think that's the reason for some people they don't go like to vote on May election. And for the cost, yes, you will need to find it's something like the other lady said. If you close that out, and some people they will confuse. Yeah, but how many people will confuse? If that location only few people, because I remember last I have the visit right here, some location only 9 or 10 people, and then you waste the resource, the people, the poll workers. You don't have enough poll workers. So they go in there and just sit there and do nothing. But some location they have hundreds of people and short of staff. If some people work in that location, they will wear out and they don't want to do it for the next time. So that is something that we will have to come up with all the listing and people opinion. You can find the right solutions for them. Thank you.
Diane Cassie, and others. We're having this little discussion in our little group here. I have to come.
Diane, can you speak a little bit more right into the mic? Maybe turn it up a little bit. There you go.
I would like to confirm something I think you said earlier. Staffing and the equipment, not the rental.
That's absolutely. The rental costs are just
Okay, so I believe the single system with fewer overall roads that are located so that they can scale up and down the staffing and the equipment would meet the requirements of staffing and the stability of a vote center for the general public so that they know where to go every time. Now, there's a question here asking, is the motion for closing the possibility of a single model? No. If the motion for a dual model is adopted, will it foreclose the possibility of the investigation of a single model?
I don't think so. I think what this means is this motion, let's investigate the dual model. And after investigating, if we think this stinks, then you consider something else. It's heading down a path that may or may not end up with that recommendation.
Yes, David Payne, Richardson ISD. A couple of questions for you, Michael. On these comparable counties that you listed here,
yes.
Do you know, did they implement a dual model for similar reasons?
I don't know. I would assume so.
And then my other question is, do you know, have y'all surveyed these other, these comparable counties here, and has the dual model had a negative impact on voter turnout in those counties?
I think that that would be part of our investigation.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Bonnie Wells is CN, and this Bonnie agrees with the Bonnie behind me. And I think that's great. Right now, from all the information I have, I agree that we should continue to investigate the dual voting centers. I think we do need to continue education. I'm sure we're not going to do it just for this decision. But I also agree that it is the candidate's responsibility to say, hey, come out and vote for me, whatever community that they're going to represent. And it's also the responsibility of the voter. We shouldn't have to be pulling and dragging them and bribing them to get out and vote. We all know that this is important. We need to stress the importance. And it's the responsibility not just of the elections department, but everybody that partakes in the voting system. And I feel very strongly about that. I would also like to ask, will it be next time we're going to possibly decide if we go down the dual, which ones that we're going to keep for the, which ones we're not going to have for the May election?
My sense is that if you're, and I'm just making up numbers just for discussion purposes, don't put any meaning. But let's say we head down the dual model path and we're going to get to 250 eventually. It's easier to find 250 quality locations. The hard part is going to be getting to 450 because there's a lot more on the boat. The first 250 are going to be much more obvious. It's those tougher calls once you start getting into the higher number.
And why is it, remind me again, why is it that we have the number of 450? I know at the beginning of Vote Center, we had to have a certain number. Then I thought every couple years we could choose to reduce it by a certain percent.
And that's where we're at right now. So when you kind of refresh everyone's memory from last week, that's what we talked about, part of the history. The history was that VCAC made a recommendation. Commissioners Court adopted that recommendation to have 469 locations and that it would be revisited in 2 years. That 2 years was postponed because of redistricting in 2022 election. Now here we are revisiting and then making a recommendation to Commissioner Court again.
I think it would be helpful if before the next meeting, if we could have the numbers of registered voters in the entities.
We're going to cover that in later in this meeting. We're going to talk about those, what you want to see in the future. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Nusayba Mahmood. I'm from the Mass Muslim American Society, DMW. I would say because investigating the dual model approach. To what Tiffany was saying, we did a lot of education in our community, and you guys had a video of 3 languages. We had a video of 8 languages, and it does not even cover the whole Muslim community that speaks different languages. One thing I would like for us to connect to the communication department, so we can explore ideas of how to educate, the average citizen with different languages or, abilities or disabilities. The other thing is, my concern is if we're investigating, in both approaches, are we considering, if we're looking at the numbers only at the cost, then we might be going at disadvantage to if we have a center that is mainly a minority that's going to come vote, but not necessarily the bigger numbers because we still need communication and education. Are we putting that into consideration as well? I think that's the other thing that what Tiffany was saying is, we might, the responsibility of the candidates is to, promote their agendas and what they're running for. I think also it's a big responsibility for the county maybe, or I could be wrong, is to educate voters over the position runnings and what they are significant and what's their importance. Like, what is a railroad commissioner gonna do? Why do I need to vote for that person, and why their decisions are significant to me on my daily life? So not necessarily a person, but the position itself.
Thank you. I'm Elaine Kim, I'm also on the CA committee. I definitely 100% agree with Karen on like today. And also agree with Derek. I don't have enough information to determine which model I would be preferred. Because I understand the financial concerns for the municipalities, but I feel very strongly that cannot be the only criteria. Nor can the number of people who voted, nor can how close, because there's a human aspect of why people vote when they vote, which many people have given examples. I'm very glad we have a disability advocate as part of the committee, because there are a lot of considerations for disability people that usually are not part of the discussion. So I'm glad to hear that. Anyway, so I'm hoping that when we have the investigation, that we do have specific criteria, but one of the criteria has to be to talk, to find out the human reason why people are voting for, not just money, not just number of votes. It can't just be data. Data is a great starting point, but the human story has to be part of it as well, because we don't want to do anything to make people not want to vote. Confuse people or have less voters. We don't want to do anything like that. So I feel very strong on that. Anyway, so I do not have a decision on which model to use, but I absolutely feel very strongly that we need to investigate.
My name is Renato Santos. I'm a member of the VCAC as well. I also concur very strongly with what I just heard from my colleague here, Ms. Campbell. I am conflicted right now as to determining how I would vote in this because of the fact that I understand fiscal considerations, but I also consider every vote sacred, and that we need to do whatever we need to ensure that every vote is able to stand. With that said, I want to also emphasize or ask a question, and that is, I heard you say that there was a significant investment from the county in terms of communication, and that you anticipated that investment would continue into the future. Would that be the case also for the municipal or local elections? I believe that the county is not as involved in, and if not, who would bear the burden of the increased communication, aside from perhaps some of the in-house social media modeling?
Can't speak for Commissioners Court. They're in a body that makes they're the boss, right? But I can tell you historically, last April, going into the May election, it's been 185 grand. I don't know, and I know that all of them are very interested in keeping voters informed and encouraging voter participation. So, like I said, I can't speak for them, but I do know that they've got a great track record of supporting voters.
That would be a big concern for me, making a decision to possibly support a dual model type of concept. There's drastic changes that we are implementing on the elections here in May. Thank you.
I want to say something about I'm the city secretary.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt? Because we got another gentleman,
Oh,
who hasn't had a chance to speak yet.
Okay, no problem.
My name is Daniel Davis Clayton, community member. I think
I know I was a member of this body in 2019. I believe I was representing the Texas Coalition of Black Democrats. I share a lot of concerns in terms of moving to a dual model due to the reduction of locations. Being someone that has worked a lot of elections, as most of us have, I think that we've heard over and over again from community members that they know where they're going to go vote. And it's usually a static place. And then when that place is removed, then the confusion takes place. And that's the problem with closures, which is what we're trying to address. And I think that going to a dual model simulates a large scale closure in May. I also think that going to a dual model may not necessarily address or compensate for the May spike that we'll have during a mayoral election that we don't necessarily have during a non-mayoral election, particularly because they're so far between. So I'm very intrigued by the idea of a single model scaled, where we look at historical data of voting in certain areas and perhaps scale the number of machines and people in those locations so that we can maintain a high number of locations yet manage the cost. And I'm also interested in perhaps investigating both models or just agreeing to investigate both models, as opposed to saying we'll investigate one, and if we like it, we'll, if we don't like it, we'll look at the other. Why don't we agree to investigate both models simultaneously? That way we work our way through all the ups and downs, and then we can make an informed decision. But in terms of a single model, I really like the idea of having it scaled so that if there's an area that has fewer voters, we just have fewer machines and fewer people, and that can help manage the cost. But to maintain a high number of locations that are static across every election.
So do we have, I know I've got someone here who wants to speak in, but I want to find out if there's anybody online who wants to speak who hasn't had a chance.
Good evening again. It's Lavetta Levels. I am a member of the VCAC committee. And as a member of the VCAC committee, I agree with my fellow VCAC members as well as a few of those in the room. But just like the last speaker shared with us, I too believe we need to continue in investigating both models. I don't believe we're at the point to make a decision on if we want to focus on one. That's basically making a decision when we none of us feel like we have enough information. What I'm hearing consistently is that there's not enough information. There's question about what other counties are doing. There's questions about how much money is being spent, about the human side. And so with that in mind, I think we should continue providing equal information on both models so that we can make a better informed decision. Watching a 40-slide presentation does not constitute being informed. And I think whatever methods and whatever strategies we plan to implement in our research, in our investigation, I would agree to utilize the same strategies and investigations toward both models so that in our next meeting, we can continue bringing additional information. And if there's additional readings that we can do individually, if Michael, if you or your staff members can provide us that individual reading, we can do that on our own so that we can feel like we are better informed and that we are making a good decision. I do agree that the communication was not where it needed to be. I'm excited about having the communication persons on staff, and I love the commercials, and I saw all the efforts, and I know that you all have the data to support on YouTube and the commercials and your social media presence. I thank you for all of those things, but I don't believe that they've been on staff long enough to have a huge effect yet. And I think so moving forward, and whatever model we use, it needs to include a huge marketing piece, a huge communication piece, and specifically a piece around those people being affected. So if we ultimately decide that we're going to go with the dual model and we're going to reduce 200 voting centers, then we need to target those 200 centers that are going to be closed, so that we can make sure we can use our data. We know who voted there. We need to make sure that we give them specific communication about where they are to go. So I'm really imploring that we continue this investigation with both models. Thank you.
Who else do we have online who would like to speak? Anyone else online? Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. And Eric, I believe the motion was to investigate implementation of the dual model approach, correct? And we have a second. Motion A, I believe. So we are going to take a vote. I think, Esmeralda, let's first do it with a show of hands, and if it feels at all close, we will go ahead and take a roll call vote. I will say though that there are certain people, we've got certain representatives, certain organizations that have more than one people potentially attending the meeting, and that if you're not a voting member of that organization, I would like you to not vote.
Clarification.
Question back here.
Is this the motion to investigate implementation of only the dual center, and we're not going to investigate single model at all?
The motion is to investigate implementation of the dual model approach. And by the way, Irma, I apologize. I had cut you off because I was letting someone else speak who hadn't spoken. Did you still?
All I wanted to say was that the dual thing is really basically for the cities. You don't have the same amount of voters. And that's one thing. The next thing is communication. And the city secretaries, we're all very active in doing communication on our website. We're required to do that. We have classes with our candidates when they come in and file. We also have something when they do the drawing. And then we also have something for our citizens. So we work really hard at that. It's one of the things we are required to do. And I think we should all look at each other and work together to get that communication. We can take from each other and learn from each other. And y'all's website is great. I send people there. I have a link to from my website to that, and they all love it. I mean, especially finding out which location has less time to go and vote. So I think part of it, we can complain about the communication, but it's up to you and your organization to find out what's out there and take from each other and learn from what others communities are doing. We have good websites. I know Shanae's is really good. And so is Renee's over there. So we just need to share, so expecting all of them to do it. We can all share with each other. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
What community, what city are you?
Addison and Renee. Shanae is Irving and Renee.
Garland.
So there was a question online of whether or not someone online can vote. And yes, they can. So we will. Yes, they can.
If they're a member.
If they're a member, yes. Yeah. So I think we have another question right here.
My name is Michael Bobrowski, and I'm a precinct chair at 3965. I make a motion that we not only evaluate the dual, but we also evaluate the single and the scalable, all three.
We have a motion on the floor.
I call for the question.
The question's been called.
It's amendment.
Vote to amendment. Ask for an
Yeah, you can amend.
Proposed amendment
You can.
to the motion.
This is Michael's
If
house.
it's acceptable if it's acceptable to the person that made the motion.
Yeah, I made the motion.
Okay, sorry.
So the person who made the motion, Karen, you made the motion to investigate implementation of the dual model. There's been a suggested amendment to that motion. And the question is whether or not you accept that amendment.
The amendment, and that was my motion. If the amendment is to add the investigation of a single model approach simultaneously with the dual model approach, then I would accept that amendment.
Is there a second? So now, is there discussion on the amendment?
What, is there gonna be a longer time frame to get these two things working at the same time, or?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think it's the information that would be being provided would be something that we could come to a resolution simultaneously. They're not mutually exclusive. I think that's fine.
I'll tell you, let me just kind of jump into this discussion. The reason that we took this approach to present a dual versus single model was that this is a very large group. I mean, an incredibly large group. And there's a lot of information to digest. And we have very tight timelines. And in order to have this body thoroughly investigate both models, we thought would be a challenge. And because it just brings a lot, there's a lot of data, a lot of things to explore in order to keep in mind that this body has to come to a conclusion. Then they have to make their recommendation. Then it has to go to Commissioners Court. Commissioners Court has to have their debate and their time to vote and implement in time for the May elections. And that is why we kind of headed down this path of, presenting as much information we think to kind of bifurcate the decision and take a path, then investigate further. Question
I was just gonna,
or discussion.
on the point you're making now, when is the deadline? When do we need to when does this body need to vote vote on a recommendation that will go to the Commissioners Court?
We would like to have this decision by March 3rd by Commissioner Court.
Is that statutory?
So our deadline as a committee is March 3rd, or is it Commissioner Court's deadline?
Well, let's put it this way. The election is May 8th.
Are you sure you're running that election?
That's why I did education.
And so we have to kind of work backwards from that date, and we're going to meet with the jurisdictions here to kind of have our initial meeting on January 31st. They've got certain, I think, the deadlines we're trying to nail down for who's participating, what does the election look like, et cetera, are by March 3rd. So that proper notice can be sent out, the locations nailed down, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of our self-imposed deadline at this point. So question back here. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just to clarify, so the 3rd is the deadline for this committee or the Commissioners Court? I misunderstood. I didn't follow.
We were hoping to have a Commissioners Court decision by that March 3rd.
So you need a decision by this group, what, 2 weeks at a minimum?
Sometime in February.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, question back here.
I need clarification. The low turnout model would usually be the May election, right? So when you have new location that doesn't have historical data and you are reducing from a 400 voting center to 100 or 200 something, how would you then determine which location would be good for you if you don't have any?
I think that's next week's meeting and the following week's meeting. That's that getting into the brass tacks, getting.
But that's helped me to determine which one is better, right? Because if it's a single, then you have to be using every data available. Right? If it's dual model, then you have to use way historical data for make decision.
Did you ever get it?
Well, I just wanted to say that even if it takes a little bit more time, maybe we can start an hour earlier. I'll stay as late, because I believe this is an important consideration, and I would like to see both considered.
Back here?
I just wanted to have a point of clarification. This is a self-imposed deadline and not a statutory deadline, correct?
That's correct.
So I agree. I think that we should explore both fully. You know, disenfranchisement, and there's concerns about the direction of the laws in the state, and it necessitates us to explore both of them fully. And if it takes longer than May the 3rd, then it just takes longer than May the 3rd, or if we can stay later and get it done. March 3rd, sorry. Well, I need some coffee, clearly. But I think that we should explore them both fully and make sure that we know that we've made the right decision for the county.
The question's been called.
Yes.
And Eric, you might need to help me out here.
You vote on the amendment first.
Yeah, we got to vote on the amendment to accept the amendment or to.
To
Up or
accept
down?
the amendment.
Yeah.
Okay, so the vote is to accept the amended motion.
Yes. Then you vote on the motion.
Right.
What's the motion?
So the amended motion is to study both models. So the question is whether or not you accept, this body is accepting that amended motion. And then we will vote on the motion itself. So all those in favor of accepting the amendment to the motion, raise your hand.
Aren't those two people that are from the same committee? I mean, aren't you supposed to have one
I'm gonna just do this. I'm gonna say that this is gonna be close enough where we're gonna want to do a roll call.
I think you should do a roll call vote no matter what.
So, Esmeralda, did you guys us through this roll call vote that you planned out?
Okay. There's 63 people. I'm going to call out the names.
Wait a minute, I thought it was gonna be, if you have a committee of an organization that has 5 people that showed up, isn't one supposed to vote?
That's why she
Okay.
said
I'm
do the
gonna
roll call.
call the
I
ones
thought you
that,
said whoever hasn't voted.
yes.
Yeah, so I know, for instance, League of Women Voters, 3 people are participating, 1 will get the vote.
I don't think there's.
One per organization.
Are getting.
Now, CAC members are represented in different districts. So,
All of us.
Each CF
Yeah.
member votes. Full vote.
That's what she was asking that there. All right, well, whoever responded to me, that's either virtual or in person, I'm gonna call out the name from my attendance. Amy Niemer, she's virtual. Amy Niemer. Alexis Denard,
Yes to the motion.
Alicia Thomas. Hannah Coca,
Yes to the motion.
Andrea Barrero,
Yes.
Ashley Owens. Ashley Owens,
Yes to the motion.
Billy Ray Johnson,
Yes.
Bonnie Wells,
No.
Randy Brown. Randy Brown. Camila Bordeaux. Camila Bordeaux. Carmen Ayala. Cindy Castilla.
No.
Cindy Gross. Cindy Gross. Cynthia Nguyen. Daniel Clayton.
Yes.
David Tate.
Yes.
Debbie Bobbitt. Diane Tazian. Dr. Haynes. Carol Haynes. Elaine Tess Campbell.
Yes.
Esther Colney. Felicitas Cadena.
Yes.
Irma Parker.
No.
Janie Willman. Jason Lee.
Yes.
Jennifer Haju. Jesse Tafala. John Eric Sedil.
Yes.
John Michael Yours. Kieran Alexander.
Yes to the motion.
Kevin Hale.
Yes to the motion.
Christy Noble. Laura Hallmark. Lawrence Weiner.
No.
Lavetta Levels.
Yes to the motion.
Mark Quinn. Mark Quinn. Michelle Hogan. Mildred Dominic.
Yes.
Molly Broadway.
Yes.
Mona Lisa. Alicia. Nusaiba Mahmood.
Yes.
Orlando Almeida. Orlando Almeida. Renato de los Santos.
Yes to the motion.
Renee Dowell.
Yes.
Robert Elkin.
Yes.
Shanae Jennings.
No.
Sylvia Martinez. Sylvia Martinez. Sidman Peck. Sidman Peck. Stacy Henderson. Stacy Henderson. Stephanie Mace.
Yes to the motion.
Susan Stevens. Susan Stevens. Marcia McCarty. Marcia McCarty. Walter Hopkins.
Yes. Yes.
That's all the ones that are members of the committee. Yes. Yes, that's, okay. Okay.
Yes. Bonnie's name is on here in number 8.
Yeah, I don't know.
Bonnie's name is on separately. Her name is there.
Yeah,
Number 8.
but
It should be in place of Christine.
yes, you are.
Did you get a vote?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so what's the next step?
She gets her count, we'll find out what that count was.
Twenty-five yes and 6 no's.
So now we'll vote. So that
The motion.
amended motion was accepted or voted approved. And so now we will vote on the motion. The motion is to continue to investigate both the dual model and the single model approach. All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed? Motion is approved. Okay, so thank you so much. We'll head down that path. And we will move as swiftly as we can to try to hit our deadlines. So, one of the things we wanted to talk about next was the vote center evaluation criteria. I'll just move through this quickly because we will talk a lot more about this in the future. So as far as the location, where is the site located in Dallas County? Is the location public or private? Is mass transit available to the location? Is there location rental costs? Other things that we can consider about location, we will continue to add those criteria. Parking spaces available. How many parking spaces does the location have? How many available parking spaces does it have? Are there ADA parking spaces available? If there's ADA spaces, are there curb ramps? Is the parking close to the building? Is the ADA parking closest to the entrance? Curbside availability for curbside voting. Is it free to park? The parking is provided. Lighting and parking is it covered? Any other parking things that we may want to discuss? The building itself, is the entrance doors fine? Are the bathrooms available? Are there bathrooms available? Political signs allowed? An electioneering allowed? Are there security concerns with the building? And then that list. The voting room itself, is the room large enough to use? Can it hold the capacity for that area? How many entrances, doors to the room? Is there an entrance exit? Is it a single entrance, et cetera? Is the door ADA compliant? Are there electrical outlets, and how many? That's a big concern for us many times with our is the room climate controlled? We've got some locations that there's no air conditioning. Is the room secure? Can we lock it? Is there good internet reception or cell phone reception is the better terminology? Actually, that's what we use, cell phone rather than any other things that we may. But that's kind of gives you an idea of what we look at. Right now, I can tell you that we are doing a vote center location survey. Our people are out in the field right now, and I mentioned this. Let's show you what this looks like real quickly. I know it's late, but so the survey, it's go out with iPads. So people are out there with iPads. They're going through this survey one. So this is kind of what they see on the iPad. They go in there, they pick, type in their name, continue on, and they pick the location, and they go in, and so they go through this series of questions that leads them through this one thing at a time. Daytime contact information.
They're on site.
Yeah, they're on site, they're out, and they're talking to that person at that location, and they're getting this series of contacts, because there's, emergency contact, evening contact, election equipment delivery contact, lockout contact. And so that's part of the problem we have now. We don't have good information about these sites. So we're trying to get better information about it. What are your regular business hours?
And when you say they, are you referring to your paid office staff?
Can you repeat the question? I didn't quite hear it.
I'm sorry, you were saying they, and I just wanted clarification on who was that? Is it
Right
paid
now,
county
our-
elections?
Right now, we have our office staff out in.
Okay.
We're kind of ramping up slowly, and we will have more and more people out in the field because we've got a lot of locations to cover.
And is that'll be paid county employees or volunteers?
Paid county employees.
Okay.
So I won't go through this all, but you know, it goes through all those things we kind of talked about. And it's a really great survey, one that we can't mess up. And it's one that we can have people without a lot of training in all these areas. So we can expand and do it as quickly and as efficiently as possible. It takes about an hour per location.
And it has a place where you can insert photographs.
Yes,
Take
so
pictures.
you take pictures, you can take videos, there's overhead Google Maps where they can mark up, look at the parking and all that sort of thing. It's great. Stop sharing, I'm gonna reshare the presentation again. And so, we want to talk real quickly about, we asked you guys to submit what do you want to see from us? And I think there's a handout. These are the things that were mentioned, legal ruling voters, gave us a whole bunch of good stuff. Many people kind of put, you know, here's information that we would like to see. So I'd like you guys to take a look at this, bring it home with you, use it as a kind of to get your brain going about what you would like to see, what else you would like to see. Send us an email at VCAC Communications. If you have something else you would like to see in the future and future meetings. Now, Kevin here, he's going to give us just a little overview of what we can do from as far as presenting data from a point of graphics in GIS. Kevin is our GIS person. He's the author of the person who does all those great tools, you know, that voter lookup tool, and then a whole, you know, where it shows wait times and everything else, as well as a whole bunch of tools we use internally. So he's just going to give us a little bit of overview about the things that we can see in the future as we're doing our research. Take it away.
All right, we got to the fun part. GIS. Yeah, this is a lot of stuff. I just want to do a quick poll right quick. How many of y'all have heard of use GIS? How many of y'all use Google Maps? Y'all seen our online functional location finder? So it's going to be under the same type of premise. Now, this is a lot of information. We want to get as much in as we can. But my task is typing information, georeferencing, and allowing us to symbolize it where you look for associations and trends. So the interface is going to look something like this. Now, yeah, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Now, thank you. Now, I want to first talk to you real quickly about the data that we're going to be using. There are some information, questions on here where you want to see things about race and age. I heard somebody say senior citizens, language, and things like that. Our main source for that type of data is going to be the U.S. Census. I want to go quick over where we get this data. The census has data from the latest 2020 census, but there are different levels of it. We extract this data according to those levels. Think of it like this. We have census blocks, census block groups, and census tracts, right? That would be the same as saying a city, a county, and then a state. So some data is available at certain levels, okay? So Excuse me. This will be the interface when you open it up, and we're gonna be, it's under construction, but we kind of want to give you an idea of what you'll be able to do. We located all of our vote centers that are representing 10 elections. As you zoom in, you can see the proximity of one vote center to the other. It's going to be very important that you turn your layers on and off. So I did hear somebody was interested in dark rail stops. So we've already mapped the dark rail stations as well as the rail routes. So if you want to look at that, if you want to consider that, not, something to think about, and that'll be at your fingertips. We also have bus stops and the bus routes. So if you were looking at a location, you kind of want to say, okay, well, how close is it to a bus stop or a rail stop? We're going to also have information that's from what we call attribute information. And it's not complete yet. We have basic information here. You see these 6 elections here? Well, they're going to be 10, and we'll decide on which ones, will be available. But in this column will be the total votes for each election for that location. So you see we have a lot of data. One of the other things, Spanish speaking, English speaking, 18 to 64, 65 and older, median age, total households. Now this is all within 1 mile. This is preliminary data that we're testing out with. So it may go up to a half mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, or whatever. So we'll decide that. The closest vote center. Now, if you say, okay, I want to close one, I want to know where the next one is, you'll have the name and the distance. Not only the closest one, but the second closest one also. So that'll give you 2 right there at your fingertips to know how far they are away.
Is there going to be a link to that so we can look at that?
Yeah, I was going to say, the real advantage to this is that you don't have to be here. Kevin doesn't have to show you. You can be at home doing your homework. You will have access to it at home.
Most likely it will be accessible from our website. So also in red, in the colors,
Is the distance as the bird flies or as a walking?
as a bird flies.
Okay.
But that's a very good question because I am coming up on actual amount.
I had no doubt.
You don't want to come to the front end. Wait, let me go on because he only gave me like 3 minutes.
Well, I can tell you this, though, there are 2 ways to look at those that GIS gives you the ability to do as the crow flies or drive time or walk.
Now, because it's dark, I'm going to turn these off. They kind of flutter us a little bit. I'll turn off my transportation layers. Now, sometimes people say, well, what about alternative locations? We actually have county buildings. We have 55, those are in blue. So some of those county buildings, such as courthouses, we already use. But we thought that would be what we call layers. So we're kind of giving you, everything we have in for consideration. And there are going to be other layers that we want to also include. So we're going to turn off the county buildings. And if you just kind of want to see what was around, North Central Texas Council of Governments actually puts out a layer. Now, we're going to have to chop these down because some of them are like apartments. These are what we call points of entry. So we're going to decide which layers or buildings that we can possibly use. Well, if you just want to know what's around it. Now, one of the things that we're really, really proud of, say for example, somebody give me a name of a boat center. Fred Spark. You see this select a vote center, you can start typing here. And it'll actually zoom to it. Now, when it zooms to it, there's your pop-up of the information again. But we also included drive distance, which is walking distance for 15 minutes or drive distance for 5 minutes. And these are distances going to the location. So within the dotted line is walking. So anybody within that dotted line, well, everybody walks faster than me, but you kind of get the idea. So we can also adjust that. We can also do 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15. So this is just kind of preliminary, to kind of get the look and feel of it. Now, it's very important, once you select one, you'll have to go back to reset. To go back out to zoom back out, but all that'll be explained. We've got a lot of room over here, we're gonna put some basic operation, instruction. So we really hope you use it. Now, the vote centers, for example, somebody talked about volume. What we can do is we can also size the data according to usage. So if you had 200 voters, it's got to be this big, you have 100 to be that big. So what we want to do is provide you information, spatially and geographically, and also by symbology. So you'll be able to make decisions, okay, this one's really doing well, this one doesn't. Just my side. Right? Thank you.
I would say, thank you. Mrs. Pam always does a great job for us. I just wanted to mention one other thing though. Something to keep in mind when we look at this GIS data and when you ask for it, I'd like to see XYZ. That we kind of, what we have versus what the Census Bureau has, we kind of speak in two different languages. We speak in terms of vote centers, in terms of precincts, in terms of where registered voters live. So I can tell you at that vote center, I can tell you, here's the list of names of people who voted there. I can tell you their addresses. I can tell you their ages. That's about it. I can't tell you their ethnicities. I can't tell you, their income levels, et cetera. Census Bureau information can tell you that, but it's a different language. Census Bureau groups their information as according to census blocks, census block groups, and census tracts. And so when you do that, there's a bit of a translation. And so it's not a clean, we may not have as clean a data as you may want. So there's a lot of interpolation, there's a lot of estimates, et cetera, when it comes to Census Bureau information versus vote center information or voter registration information that we have. So just keep that in mind. But nonetheless, it's very powerful. And behind every map, there's a lot of data. So it's tabular data in the background, it's spatial data being presented graphically. So great tool for us to use to enhance our decisions.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you going to be available to maybe go to like the city secretaries? We have a chapter and we have like 50, 60 members. Would you be able to go to our meeting and explain all this? Because this is data that we all use.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want your card.
They only give you 5.
They only give you 5? We'll write it down on a piece of paper.
It's not available yet.
Oh.
So beginning next week, when we come back next week, we're going to have, the requested information that you this list of information supplemented by any other further requests now that you have a little date what's available. And we will start to look at individual locations. And I'm not sure exactly, especially now with dual models, after, both models, I'm not sure exactly how we're going to present that. We're going to have to contemplate that. Is there any thoughts, though, if anyone has any suggestions or what else they would like to see for next week? Kind of getting to the nitty gritty of making some decisions.
So I think one thing I wanted to ask about, I know we captured the data at the voting. I'm done. I know we captured the data for like using it in Server or to do curbside voting or assisting someone. Can we have these data that was captured under the election in the GIS?
Anything you would like to see, shoot us an email. We will add it to the list and we will see whether or not how we can do it and if we can do it.
Will it already be layered on there, the ones that are having really, really low turnout over and over and over? Or are we gonna see an average? What's the number that we're seeing on the voter turnout at each location?
What we're looking for, and what we're looking to do is actually turn out for each election, for each location. You have some locations that may have participated in 4 of the 10, or 4 of the 6.
But we'd see that they only had 4 elections there, and we'd know which ones they are.
Actually, we're planning to have the number of elections that they participated, to count for each election as far as election date, and also an average of the date that they were open.
Great, thank you.
I would like,
I'm sorry, there was a person online that had their hand up, so I wanted to go ahead and let him, I don't want to ignore him.
oh,
Go ahead.
Yeah, also the Kevin Hale, Libertarian Party, Dallas County. There's going to be a lot of uncontested races, especially in the outer municipalities. We need to take that into account whenever we do pull back on our voting centers. If there's a lot of, like in Garland, for instance, there's probably going to be 2 or 3 uncontested races there. How many voting centers do you need? You know what I mean? So let's also keep that in mind.
We'll have a better idea after February 18th, because that's the deadline, and I know a lot of school districts will probably have bond elections. So even if they don't have a school board election, they have a bond election.
Hey, Kierman?
Dory Crenshaw with League of Women Voters. 2 questions, comment and a question. The question is, you talked about no election turnouts and such like that, but I haven't heard you speak about runoff elections, which are even worse than no election, than no turnout elections. So as we go forward, I'd like to hear your thought about what you're going to do about runoff elections, as well as some instances where we all know that there are elections that only cover a portion of the county. You know, DISD District 2 has an election, but not 4, 6, et cetera. How are you thinking about handling those? So that's the question. The comment is that next, I love the idea if you're going to do a show and tell for the GIS system and such. Perhaps it might be most advantageous if we brought our iPads or laptops and could follow along versus trying to, I mean, on the screen it's unintelligible. And that might be the fastest way to get people up to speed, if that works for you as a presentation. Put through a very generic how to do some things, let us follow along, I think would be a best use of everybody's time.
Great suggestion. I'm sort of refresh my memory on what the question was. Quickly,
About runoff elections and.
Oh, yeah, my assumption is, let's say if you went with the dual model, my assumption would be that Commissioners Court, we would go to Commissioners Court before any election and have them of this, a low turnout model or the high turnout model. My assumption would be if you had a May election that was a low turnout model, the runoff for that same election would be a low turnout. I think the ones there's some that are on the bubble, like a November and an odd year. An odd year. Is that a low turnout, high turnout? I think a lot of it depends on how hot the race is, right? And so you'd have your Commissioners Court probably telling us which model to run. Primary election, for instance, we haven't really talked about that, but I would assume a primary election would be a large model, right?
I was hoping that we can also have a criteria that there, before doing any type of reduction, especially that because we're making that choice, having conversations with the actual voters, not just like the mayors and council, that's the actual community.
And thus, that's why we have the VCAC, because you guys are the voice of the people. And so it's incumbent on you to be talking to your.
Absolutely.
Any other comments? Okay, so our next meeting.
Just an additional comment, that is that I would be very concerned that we include an equity mindset as we approach if we do explore the dual concept and cutting back, that it would be easy to look, and I suspect that there are going to be a cluster of low-performing remote centers, and they might all be in a certain part of a community, and we want to make sure that we don't make all the cuts, or many of the cuts, most of the cuts, in those sectors, so that we inadvertently disenfranchise, even if it's a small group, but an important group.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your participation. I really appreciate it. Our next meeting is February 1st at 7 p.m. in the same location.
Is there a public comment moment?
Yes, there is.
I would like to make a, just as, not as a member, but as
And
a
I
public.
apologize for my session.
It's okay. I was an election judge in the late 80s, for a lot of years, and we had easy to get workers. We had in-precinct voting, and it didn't break your body to do it. Our machines didn't break because we had one locked box, and the ballots went into that box, and we drove that box downtown and we could watch it be counted. We never had a shortage of workers. We didn't have voter complaints. People all voted within about a mile of their home, and the place never changed. If it changed, you had parties, precinct chairs who could let their people know that their voting location was changed, but it generally didn't change. And I just want to bring that up. We worked so hard to solve problems we've created. And that's all I have to say.
So I should ask online, do we have any other members of the public that would like to speak, to comment? Anyone else here? Okay, having said that, I think we stand adjourned.
Thank
I don't remember if you were, yeah, I think you were a little late, but this is, we supposed to request it, information that they were talking about. Because I think that so far people have sent it. And if you'd like to, compare the email on our
Website, how well it